The shir is dedicated to Nishmas Rachaleya Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi. We've been discussing the Malach of Zoreia, and what I want to do today is really in the first 10-15 minutes just to wrap up a few other details of Zoreia. And then I realized that in a prior shir we had discussed a few shir ago the Malach of Korea tearing, and I know I left hanging a few halachal ma'is applications. I want to finish off this shir with Korea. So again, if you're looking ahead, we'll finish up Zoreia in the first 10-15 minutes. And then we'll go into the malacha of Korea, again, halacha l'maisa focused. There is a very fascinating Gemara in Maseches Shabbos, Daf Pei Aleph, which deals with this situation of flower pots. And flower pots are very interesting in the halacha. The Gemara in a number of different places discusses flower pots, and we generally assume that there are two types of flower pots in the halacha. There's what we call an atzitz nakuv, if you have a flower pot that has a hole in the bottom. So we assume that when it comes to an atzitz nakuv, there is unika, there is some kind of flow of nutrients from the earth into the flower pot itself, and that's true certainly when the flower pot is sitting on the ground, on the earth itself, but is even true if there's a separation between, let's say, if you have a suspended flower pot that has a hole in it. So we assume that there's unika from the karka, even if the flower pot is not sitting directly on the ground itself. An interesting chiddush. But we assume that there is nutrients that are garnered from the earth through the air into the flower pot. That's not true when you have an atzitz she'eino nakuv. If you have a flower pot that does not have a hole in it, so then obviously there's no way for the nutrients from the earth to enter into the flower pot itself, and therefore the flower pot is not considered to be mechubar la karka, part of the ground. It's considered to be separate and distinct. The halacha does assume, however, that if you have, for example, a flower pot made of cheres, of earthenware, so because it's very, very porous, even if there's no real hole, but it's very porous, and nutrients and the like can penetrate through the cheres itself, so that also would have a din of an atzitz nakuv. So here the Gemara has the following situation. It's found on Maseches Shabbos Pei Aleph Amid Beis, and the Gemara says as follows: Gufa Amar Reish Lakish Tzror Sha'olu Bo Asavim. You have a stone, and you have on the stone, you have asavim, you have grasses, moss that grows on the stone. Now in the old days they didn't have toilet paper, and because of that they used to use flat stones in order to go ahead and clean themselves up after using the facilities. So here you have a tzror, a stone, sha'olu bo asavim. Are you allowed to use that as to wipe yourself? So the Gemara tells us, muter lekaneach ba. You're allowed to wipe yourself. Why? What's the issue? So when you go and wipe yourself, you might cause some of that moss to remove itself from makam gidulo. This moss grows on the stone, and therefore there's an issue of oker davar migidulo, removing, severing it from its place of growth. So the Rashi explains the reason you're allowed to wipe yourself with this stone, even if it might result in removal of the moss, is the enim eskaven litlosh. You don't have kavana for tlisha. Umutter dalach kravi shimon. We paskin davar shenim eskaven is mutter, and this is a davar shenim eskaven, apparently not a psik reisha, and therefore it will be permissible. Fine. If, of course, you go ahead and just remove the moss from the rock, bekavana hatolesh mimenu b'shabes chayev chatas, that's certainly going to be an Isser de Oraisa. Comes on the Gemara and continues. Amar Papi says, Shma mina mid Reish Lakish. We see from Reish Lakish, who says you're allowed to wipe yourself with this rock that has moss on it, that high parpisa, if you have a parpisa, what that means exactly is subject to some debate. We're going to explain it like Rashi right now. High parpisa, Rashi says it's an atzitz nakuv. If you have a flower pot that has a hole on it, shezarubo, so you're allowed to move it, shari little tule b'Shabbos. You're allowed to, it's not muksa. You're allowed to move it on Shabbos. Maskler of kahana, im amru l'tzorech, yomashol tzorech. It's only if you have a tzorech. Would it even be the case if you don't have a tzorech? And the Gemara says, no, it is muksa if there's no tzorech. And then the Gemara says what I want to focus on. The Gemara then says, Amar Abaye parpisa, we're talking about flower pots. So ho'ova asali yadan, since you brought up flower pots, lema luhu milsa. Let me tell you something about these flower pots. Let me give you a halacha to tell you about flower pots. What exactly is the din that he's going to tell us? So, Haya munach al gabe karka. If you have this atzitz nokuv, a flower pot that has a hole in it that's sitting on the ground, vinicho al gabe yesedos, and you pick it off the ground and you suspend it from, let's say, these pegs. So what's the din on Shabbos? If you did that on Shabbos, mechayev mishum tolesh. You violate an isser of tolesh. What do you mean? Oker davar migidulo. Kotzer. You removed it from its place of growth. Now it's suspended. That is going to be osir. And what about the reverse? What about the reverse? Hayamunach al gabe yesedos. If it's sitting on these pegs, vinicho al gabe karka, and you put it